Well, I hope that you can join me today for a little drawing session. Take a moment to relax and just zen out a little bit. So I'm hoping you can join with me as we get started here. I'm doing the traditional four corner dots to create a little border for my drawing. And then we're going to draw our string, the area that's going to define where we draw our patterns. And we're going to draw it in the shape of a Z. So I'm going to come in from the corner there and just create a little notch for that first part of the Z, and then I'm going to start right up here in the corner and bring my line down, and let's make this kind of thick here too, like the top. And we've just got a Z-shaped pattern that we can use for drawing our tangles. And let's jump right in then. So we're going to fill these two spaces with a tangle pattern called Bunzo. And we're going to just start doing this. And there's a couple different ways you could draw this. I like to start with the little dot or little orb in the center, and then just work outward with these little curved line moon shapes, or however you'd like to think of that, but it just keeps going outward until you feel it's big enough. Or you can also then alter those curves and redirect that Bunzo shape, and we'll show you what the rest of it looks like here in a moment. And we just create what I call a Bunzo worm. It's just the Bunzo shape with some additional form to it. Now when we ink this shape, I always start with black ink at the smallest portion, then I skip one, and I create a purposefully jagged edge where I want to create a light reflection. Let me zoom in here for us. So then I would skip again, do that same thing, just inking this in, and then leaving that ragged piece, so to speak, where we want to simulate a reflection. And I'll try to match that along the shape that I create here so that it looks like it is a uniform reflection around a rounded shape. Now Bunzo does not have to look like a worm. That's just my goofy little take on it, because I'm going to make these Bunzos provide some motion and movement in our drawing today. So I like to do that in that little funny shape. And of course, as you get smaller, you can't really see those details. Now we just want to create some additional Bunzo shapes to fill these two areas. So let's do that. And there's no right or wrong way, as I always say. You just kind of do what feels right to you and that captures your imagination as you go about making this shape. In fact, I'm going to curve this one the other way. Just like that. And then I'll ink this the same way with those alternating areas. Fill this area in here with a smaller one. Who knows how big Bunzo worms are? I don't think there is a specific size. The scientists that study such things, entomologists, isn't that bug scientists, bug experts, insect experts? I don't think they've studied the Bunzo worm yet. So we don't know what to expect there. This one's going to come in from the top. What I want to do here, we're going to do another tangle here in the Z pattern, but I'm going to have a Bunzo worm that's escaping, so to speak, out of his area up onto this other piece. So I'm going to draw it from this direction. And I'm going to let it go right up into here. But I'm going to angle it down a little bit and bring it down to size. Just like that. So now when we draw our next pattern, this little worm can be escaping up onto that other pattern. Just makes it a little fun. A little silly perhaps, but it's a fun way to add a little variety to our drawing. Now we come over here and we'll do the same kind of pattern. We'll continue on with Bunzo. I think we need one more that's escaping. So let's make this one turn a little bit more here. Maybe he'll even go back this other way. Just like that. Now I can ink these all in. Now what we want to do for our next part is create some lines for a grid. We're going to use in Zeppel. I know we've done that, I think, in one or two other tangles, but we're going to use it here to fill in our Z. It's just a lighter tangle with some nice lines, and we're going to try to curve it in a certain way just to make it look more interesting. So let's just do this. We're going to start here up at the top in the upper left, and we'll draw sort of a curved line that comes down and connects down here at the bottom. Of course, we'll have to draw behind here. So we'll come to there, and this would come right through and just connect. And then we'll go over a little bit from that line, and we're going to draw this down in that same curve, but let's bring it a little narrower at the bottom. So we'll draw behind again, like that. And we'll repeat that again here. And then let's widen this one a little bit as we make this curve. And it'll help finish a little piece there, and then I'm going to draw one more that curves a little kind of tightly like that, but it won't show down here. But we will need a couple here. Let's bring these a little wider. And then like that. So it's almost like it's getting wider as it goes this way. Now we're going to draw some curves in the opposite direction, but with the same kind of idea. Let's try to make them wider down here and a little narrower as they go up. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to almost follow this line here, I think, and create a little bit of a curve here. Just like that. And then I'll come down here. As I go up, it gets a little narrower. So then I'm going to go wide here. That. So it almost looks like we've got a grid that's warped. For the next part of Enzeppel, I'm going to use a wider nib on my pen. I'm using an 08. I use a 01 to start with. Within each square, we're going to trace the outside just inside the square that we've drawn, and we're going to curve each corner, almost like we're squishing a balloon inside this square or rectangular shape. And just fill in every spot where you've created a rectangle or a square on your grid. That's all there is to it. And you just keep doing that until the entire grid has been covered. So there we have our two tangles. We've got Bunzo and we have Enzeppel. Now it's time to do a little shading. Now with Bunzo, we can shade just along the edges so that we'll blend it just a tiny bit and we'll create a more effective illusion of roundness to these shapes. So we don't have to be heavy-handed here, just very light because it'll spread quite nicely for that small area that we need. So just shading within along these edges here. As you can see, I'm just putting a tiny bit of pencil mark in there just so that we can shade it and add a little sense of roundness. And kind of where they come together, you might want a sense of shadow there because it's going to go down into a crevice, so to speak, or into a piece where the sunlight or light of any kind isn't going to be getting down in there very well. So let's just blend this and I'll show you here a little bit. So we're just going to blend it inward though. Try not to go outside of your Bunzo shape because we'll reserve those shadows for another part of our drawing here. But in that little area, just along the edges here, trying to leave that white piece to match our where we inked it, or at least it's close to that. It doesn't have to be precise, of course. You can see that this side looks much more convincing and much more three-dimensional than this side, even though we drew the exact same shapes. But just by adding some gentle tonal qualities there, we really make those little Bunzo worms look like they've got some shape to them. So we'll do the same thing to the other side here. So our Bunzo worms are looking pretty good. Now we want to also shade our Enzeppel. I'm going to do two types of shading here. I'm going to do what we call an area or a division shading. I'm going to shade around the whole edge of it because I want to make that whole area distinct. And it will also lower it so that it'll look like the Bunzo shapes are up above. But I also want to shade these individual pieces. So I'm going to start with that, and I'm going to just do the lower right corner. I'm going to add a little tiny curve. This is very similar to how we shade multiple different tangle patterns that we can use that to create a sense of dimension to these little things. They're like little pillows or little puff balls or something. They're going to have a little curve to them, where light is hitting it a different way or shadows being cast a different way. Don't worry about super precision as always, just some gentle little curve in that lower right of each shape. I would recommend putting them on the same side, even as these pieces change their position on the paper. We still want that consistent pattern or appearance of pattern to show up on the overall drawing. So we've got all those spots there. And now what I'm going to also do is add a little graphite and pencil markings along the outside edge. And if it goes over what you've already done, that's fine. I'm just doing this, I'm not pressing much harder, but I'm adding a little more graphite because I'm going to blend that inward and make that whole thing look like it's pillowed up a little bit too, as well as going behind these other shapes, the Bunzo shapes. So I'm coming right down here into the corner. Actually, I need to add one little pillow mark here that I almost didn't see. There we go. And we'll just put a little nook there and we'll create our edge. So now when I hit this, I'm going to add the graphite around on the outside of the Bunzo shapes to lift them up from the background. Now when we come to our little escaping guys, I'm only going to put a shadow on one side of it just to help make it a little more dimensional hopefully, but I'm going to continue with the shadow around this entire Z. Because I want to show how that Z is a separate piece from all those other pieces. Now here, if we look, my shadow is here on this side, so I'm going to put the shadow on this side of this one. Trying to keep a symmetry there, but I am going to shade all around the Z then, continuing on the other side. By trying to be consistent that way, and it's certainly not required in Zentangle, but by trying to do that to some small degree, it just helps the eye to be more convinced and the brain to be fooled about the dimensionality and shape of these things, and it just makes it a little more fun. So now what do we do with our blending? So on these, we're just going to lightly dust that corner to create that little bit of a puffy look to this. It's got some dimension to it now. It's not just flat. So you just shade that or blend that little bit of pencil mark that you made there and just help to give some sense of shape to these little individual pieces. Sometimes they look like chiclet gum to me or something like that. Once you have as many of those done that way as you can, then we can just gently blend in this outer edge to help separate this Z and make it stand out in its own way as a separate section. Here's my escaping worm. He's casting a little bit of a shadow there. So there we have our Tangle for today. I think it's good to go, and we can sign our name or our chop to this. I grabbed my wrong pen. Let's do a right here. I'm just going to add my chop down here in the lower corner. Just like that. Well, thank you again for joining me today. I know it was a simple, straightforward Tangle piece, but I hope you had some fun exploring Bunzo and revisiting Zentangle. Hopefully it was an enjoyable and relaxing time for you. But I'm always grateful for your company, and thank you so much for visiting the channel and for watching. I appreciate that very much. I look forward to chatting with you again soon here in the Tangles and Tunes channel. Until then, take care now. Bye-bye.